Please welcome to the stage your host for today, Launchpad's Anne Driscoll.
Welcome back. Welcome back to the Future Society stage, where we hear from leading influencers about how technology is changing the face of our world in terms of how we work, how we live, and how we play. I'm delighted to introduce our first panel this afternoon, but before, we're going to be learning about how we can make cities' places better places to work, the future of jobs and wages, consumer protection in the digital age, and why we must restore trust in the internet. But before we move on to that, let's start about smart cities and smart living. 2/3 of the world's population will be living in cities in the next 30 years. Our next panel shares insights on how to make those cities better places to live and work. Please put your hands together with a warm Web Summit welcome for Katie Collins from CNET, in conversation with Thomas Ermacora of Clear Village, the City of Barcelona's Chief Technology Officer, Francesca Bria, and Gogoro founder and CEO, Horace.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today to talk about the extremely exciting topic of smart cities. Now, we don't have a lot of time, and we've got 3 panelists here that have a really diverse range of experience, so I think we should just jump straight in and perhaps run through a little bit about how each of you defines what a smart city is. Horace, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, my name is Horace Luke. I founded a company named Gogoro. Fundamentally, what we're doing is trying to change how people who live in mega cities adopt smart, connected electric vehicles in the future. Instead of charging a vehicle, we provide an energy swapping, battery swapping infrastructure that lets people swap and go in just 6 seconds. And a lot of people probably don't realize that people live in Ho Chi Minh City, in Jakarta, in places in India. The infrastructure gaps in which the standard of living is so far distant from what we are today that in order to adopt an electric vehicle, then something drastic needs to change. And so what we're doing is doing exactly just that, taking connected smart batteries and letting users swap and go, and so they can actually enjoy the future of transportation a little easier.
Great. Francesca?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that I think there cannot be any digital revolution without a democratic revolution. So the reason why I was nominated by our mayor, Ada Colau, to be head of digital policy in Barcelona was exactly to rethink the meaning of the smart city from the ground up together with citizens and really think what technology can do to serve the people. How can we design technology different? Why do we need a smart city at all? So shift the priority from a technology push agenda, where we first put infrastructure, connectivity, sensor network, big data, and then we ask, what are we going to do with this data? What kind of problems we want to solve? Completely revert the paradigm. Start from citizen needs, start from the big urban challenges that we have. For instance, Barcelona, we want to tackle affordable housing, energy transition, sustainable mobility. We want to fight CO2 emission. So start with the big challenges, citizen needs, and only after ask what kind of technology do we need? How do we govern this technology? What about data sovereignty? Who is owning the infrastructure, the data? And then we find out what's the best model to serve the people. I think it's a big challenge. And the other thing that I would advocate is that smart cities need new global democratic standards. So we need new rules to make digital democracy work for the many and not for the few. And I think amongst those big standards that we can discuss later, I'm a big advocate for a new social pact on data, meaning that we have to tell everybody that this big data that we produce, 90% of the data we use today and that cities aggregate weren't produced 3 years ago, they belong to people, they belong to citizens. And we cities can be custodians of the new digital rights of citizens and see how we can come to a more ethical, transparent, responsible innovation policy. I think in Barcelona we want to be at the center of this transformation.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas, I know that you're also really passionate about empowering citizens in your definition, so why don't you tell us about that?
Well, thank you. You made my job very easy. I think it's the word smart that has bothered me the most up until now. And as many colleagues, we do find that smart cities are quite dumb in the sense that they don't actually provide a citizen intelligence layer that's proportionate to the amount of technology gimmicks that are being fed to the public procurement environment. And so, for example, at the last year's World Smart City Expo in Barcelona, where I was speaking, you roam around certain rooms, a bit like here at Web Summit, and you see an immense amount of things being sold to cities. And that's great because, cities need to upgrade their hardware and they need to upgrade their software, but they probably also have to upgrade, a lot of their civic performance indicators and, the relationship, the civic contract that they, have in many instances poorly designed and was not open to notions of the digital age when we have big data and the platforms that we can create, leveraging the blockchain, perhaps for fair appropriation, etc. So I think very much in line with what you were saying, we need to reinvent democracy, and I have a certain hope or a conception of the smart city where technology is not a driver but a slave. Where effectively it is the citizen that has to have a new dialogue with its administration and with the companies that will be procured for in order to develop a service layer that has intelligence and then be able to be called smart.
And you both raised some great points there about data and citizens. I think a really important issue for citizens that are going to be living in these smart cities is privacy and how their privacy is going to be upheld. And I'd love to know how you think we can make sure that citizens still feel in control of their data. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a crucial issue, and not only for cities, I think for the future of the digital economy. I think, first of all, governments, as companies, they have to recognize this basic fact that citizens are the ones that own the data, and they are the ones that have to decide on what basis they want to share with data, with whom, and for what purpose. So we need to really move away from black boxes. In particular now with the rise of AI and big investment in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on, we really need to make sure that we move from the black boxes where nobody knows what goes in and what goes out and what are the rights around data, and we establish new collective rights to data. And the citizens are the ones that have to decide how they want to share it. In Barcelona, we talk about data commons. And I think for me, it's very important to understand data as a new public infrastructure, as an infrastructure for the common good, like a city infrastructure, like gas, electricity, water, roads, and that can be collectively owned. So we need to move away from data extractivism, because now the data is in the hands of very few companies. So I think in line what you were saying about big procurement, this very unsexy word that we use a lot in cities when we buy technologies, I think we want to not end up with an oligopoly of few companies that own all the data, and then we are going to depend on them to create AI-driven services that are going to transform the future of society. So we want to basically move away from data extractivism into a situation where we can really decide the direction of technological change, because if we collectively own the data and we give the rights back to the citizens, then we can understand how do we use data to have a better mobility. How do we use data to fight climate change and improve quality of air? How do we use data for better healthcare? How do we use data for participatory democracy? So data can become really this public common resource that can help us achieve collective challenges in a democratic way, and also help us see what is the future of the economy and of the world that we like to live in. In particular now in this summit we are discussing robotization, massive automation of production and all of this, and I think it's going to be fundamental, and in particular for Europe, of course, that is a bit left out of this technological revolution, to get back data sovereignty, but not in a top-down way, you know, like the big brother surveillance economy. So away from government spying citizens and companies spying citizens, but really reestablish a democracy around data and new collective rights to data. I think this is very exciting because then we can really go into fully digital public services that benefit many more people.
Yeah, and I mean, the kind of decisions that you're talking about making require immense collaboration between the public and private sector, I think. Now, Horace, I know that you have had enormous success in Taiwan, but you've also worked with other cities. You've worked with Paris and you've worked with Berlin. What, from your point of view, can cities and local governments do to make your job easier when you kind of come to their cities and hope to expand there?
I think this has to do with a couple things. First, you know, Gogoro focus a lot on educating our customers, the public, about what living in a smarter environment really means. Connected, safe, you know, healthier environment through electric vehicle adoption. And through that education, I think that that generates a demand. And then, of course, with the regulators, there's a lot of needs to improve their city and the way that the city is run. So we actually, I think our responsibility is to bridge a gap between the two. So therefore, you know, creating the demand and excitement from the understanding of what the smart city can do for healthier living to having a solution that the regulators can point to and celebrate and say, you know what, my people that are living in the city now are actually getting access to better solutions. So instead of creating a nuts and bolts, I often use the analogy of granola. You know, nobody likes to just eat granola. You have to kind of put sugar, you have to put chocolate, you have to put cranberries on top of it, and then the consumer gets excited about it. But at the end, they don't even know why they're doing it, but they just know that it's better, and they like it more. And that's what I think what Gogoro is really focused on, is generating that consumer excitement around smarter, more connected, safer, and healthier living in a big city of like Barcelona and others.
And Francesca, you kind of come from the opposite point of view, whereby you work for the city. So what can companies like Gogoro do to work better with you and make sure that you have a successful partnership? Yeah,
I think it's very important, this kind of partnership, in a sense of really relationship. More than, we really actually have to go back to the question of procurement. Like usually the way that big contracts work is that it's a contractual model of relationship. It's not a real partnership. And I think we have to move to that relationship, like real partnership, where companies can help cities to solve the challenges, the real problems that we are trying to address. For instance, in Barcelona, we are creating a digital marketplace, which is all based on open standards, and it's online, and it's transparent, also because we want to eliminate corruption. We don't want to have very few companies that access all the contracts, but we want to work with the small companies, with the startups, with the innovators, with the social enterprises, even with citizens' initiatives that have the right idea and can tap into the resources that we have, and of course the data, open data and data commons, and then build solutions with us. So this digital marketplace is the way to put procurement out there, eliminate corruption, get the smaller company in. And then of course we have ways with innovative public procurement, which is a way to not only do the test beds. Until now, a lot of the smart cities projects in cities have been test beds, like little experiments that were working, some were not working, then were stopped, and we have infrastructure to do this kind of testing with smaller companies. But now we want to move to the next level, where the city can actually buy the innovative services, create a marketplace for the type of solution that we need to address the actual problems of the cities. And of course, we are putting rules in procurement about open standards, the free software, the open data, data sovereignty and privacy of citizens, so that it's fair. And we can ensure that the companies can have much more opportunities, but also that we create public good and social good by doing that way.
Now, Thomas, you bring an interesting perspective to this debate in that you come from an architecture background. So when it comes to designing smart cities, what are your recommendations, both to public and private companies that want to shape the future of a successful smart city?
I'm going to abstract a little bit from the question because I want to address something that was said just before, and I'll get back to it. So and the comment I really want to make, and first of all, I really applaud what you're doing in Barcelona, by the way. I think you're setting an example for many other cities. And this is the point, actually, that smaller cities will not have the capability to fully have a high-class CTO. They won't necessarily be able to negotiate deals in ways that they should be. So it is the main cities that are currently taking the risks to define the data relationship and the sort of contractual relationship that will drive that game. And I think that's why it's so important that you're successful with what you're doing and setting a trend for a very citizen-empowered possibility for a smart city. And really, the kind of 3 points I wanted to quickly allude to is, we have a lack of understanding of data ethics. So we don't actually know, when you ask a citizen, would you be okay to do this or would you be okay to do that? They don't actually fully comprehend the complexity that's embedded in the question. And so we need to be much better, and that's probably the city's role, to make citizens understand, okay, we're going to sign this contract and we're going to give this right to the data, et cetera. And before we have a full data commons with perhaps a Creative Commons license framework, et cetera, before we can fully do that, there's going to be repositories of data that we don't master, and we need to engage the conversation on that. So that's the first one. The second thing is the data provenance. So where does the data come from? Is it actually coming from a sensor? Is it coming from a sensor fleet? Is it coming from a citizen, a piece of equipment? Is it from a private company? Is it from a public company? Is it contracted, subcontracted? All that stuff, it's very hard to know about the data provenance. And we didn't know where chickens came from a few years ago, and we somehow remembered that it was important. And I think it's a bit the same thing with data. We kind of need to create a sense of data provenance. And last but not least, it's this idea of data literacy. When you speak to public officials, they don't necessarily understand the implications of the questions that they're being asked in the first place. So we also need to generate more data literacy for the public arena. Yeah. And I think you're doing that very well. So just wanted to comment on that, because I think these are things that perhaps the technology-savvy crowd that we have here doesn't necessarily appreciate. And we are part of the 10% roughly of those who are fully technologically engaged and optimistic and enthusiastic. There might be some skeptics around, but overall you're here. So we need to relate to the fact that those decisions about data concern the 100% and not just us. So in terms of design and how we want to design cities, traditionally, architecture and urbanism has been a selector of technology based on the requirement of the commissioner, but it hasn't actually been leading the question around, the digital space very much. Perhaps with VR and AR, that might become, more concrete. Although then the designers are not physical designers; they're more virtual designers. So I think what we need to appreciate is this chain of events in which the design factor is relatively small in relationship to technology, and that has to change. So we need to educate, again, the sort of architecture and urbanism sphere to say, what are some of the desirable features that you want to have? From my background, one of the key things that I focus on is on developing commons, actually, where people can contribute to where the city is self-generative in its well-being capability, and almost engineer a meta-welfare component where the well-being of citizens is co-created. And I think that that's where data should have that same property. When you talk about your medical data, your entertainment data, your choices for mobility, your choices for environmental efficiency, et cetera, how you relate to the machine or AIs around you, all of that should be part of a relationship where the designer has an effect. And we haven't figured out that question, how that's going to be affected. Only a few design studios in the world are actually capable of this. So to quickly answer this, if you want in a soundbite, I think that the architecture world has one imperative, which is to decide what it can do in relationship with the smart city that is not related to gear, but related to the convenience of the citizen, and that they are the partner of the citizen in order to make that happen.
And if I can stress something around all this question of data, because I do really think that this is the big opportunity for Europe in this space, because of our regulation and our understanding of fundamental rights to citizens and understanding of privacy and data protection as citizen fundamental rights. And now we have coming up the new data protection regulation and the privacy regulation. And we have a body of rules and laws that allow us to make that new citizen rights to data a new kind of platform, our competitive advantage vis-a-vis a different model, which is more data extractivist, which is more consumer-based. And that's, I think, I mean, in Europe, we have fantastic expertise on that level. We can also experiment with distributed data architecture, like the blockchain, like distributed ledgers. We have cryptographers, so we can think that cryptography is, that crypto and encryption is a human right. And on top of that, you can build new decentralized, privacy-aware, and rights-respecting architectures that can allow all of us to create the future. And I think this is an exciting opportunity. And in Europe, we should take that as really our advantage and our opportunity to build the future society, digital society that we want. So I'm really, I think we should stress this, and then to do it bottom up, involving citizens, because this is really important. Because they are the ones at the end that have to be empowered in their own place, in their own cities.
I think we talked a lot about data, and one of the things that I always get frustrated with is the difference between precious data and non-precious data. A really good example of how we're working with the public sector is, we openly share, the amount of energy that's being used per district, even to the neighborhood, so that in Taiwan, our public official can say, by adopting and being a champion of, doing something like our battery swapping infrastructure, that actually improved my neighborhood's quality of life by saving how much CO2 this week. I mean, we can do it to a very granular level. And so in a lot of ways, I look at data and say, some things are precious and some things should be commoditized and some things should be just very openly shared with the partners that are in the cities that are helping us transform these cities into smarter and healthier cities.
And Horace, you're using data in a really interesting way to serve your customers better, I think, as well. We touched on AI, but bringing some AI into that. Why don't you we're nearly out of time, but why don't you briefly tell us what you're doing with that?
So we actually, a lot of people think, Gogoro just puts 2 batteries in and 2 battery comes out. Well, it's actually a lot more than that. We look at the way, the usage pattern, the weather pattern, what temperature it is today. Whether or not people are going to move about in what kind of ways, and use artificial intelligence to guesstimate when somebody's going to come and get that battery. And so by doing that, we can actually help, to the user, it's just 6-second swap and go. To us, we're helping the electric grid by saying, we take energy only when there's a surplus of energy. But we hold and never take more energy when energy is actually, in demand at the moment. So we do a lot of things to try to balance the grid as well, not only by satisfying the customer, but also at the same time satisfying the growing needs of a city as we see the energy demand growing pretty rapidly. And so that's something that we're very excited about, that as we get engaged on a city level or country level, sharing that opportunity and say, right now when the energy is in surplus, a lot of cities actually don't know what to do with it. And by having batteries, that's perfect for shifting that energy to store it and then give it out when people need it the most.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time, but hopefully we can all take something away from this, whether you're somebody that works in a city or lives in a city or works for a city, you'll find a way to kind of contribute, and hopefully in the long run we'll all benefit. The mass population of our growing urban centres will benefit from this in the long run. So thank you very much, everyone.